The trees knew his name before he spoke it. It slid through the leaves like a warning, landing in Jonah's mouth cold and metallic. He had driven past the last streetlight until the world became only black glass, and then walked until his phone's battery blinked red. The forest took the city's rules and chewed them into dark things. Paths that folded back on themselves, a GPS that spun like a broken compass, air that tasted of rain and something iron deep. Jonah carried Marcus's leather satchel because the police had closed the case, and the family could not let a body become rumor. He walked with the satchel clenched to his chest, the strap biting his shoulder, and with every step, the forest tightened its listening. At first, the oddness was a quiet, measured thing. Moss trunks scarred by deliberate gouges, tufts of hair braided into knotty branches, a looped rope hanging from a limb, though there were no high branches to tie a noose. Jonah found a child's sneaker half buried in leaf mold, and a smear of dark on a stone. Old blood or berry, he could not tell, and his stomach riled against the thought of what both might mean. He called Marcus, voice thin with hope and grief, and the forest answered not with voice, but with other sounds that felt like replies. A distant footfall, too steady for animal. A humming under the canopy that echoed a song the brothers used to bellow in the car. Jonah followed that wrong music deeper, because the ache of not knowing is a lever strong enough to push a man into danger. The first twist arrived like a photograph gone rotten. He unzipped the satchel to check for anything he'd missed, and the picture inside, the two of them by the river, Marcus grinning with a cigarette, was altered. Marcus's smile had sharpened, his eyes hollowed to two reflective coins, and the back of the photo smelled faintly of soil. Jonah thumbed the edge and a memory rearranged itself. A night at the river that now had no sound, no small talk, only darkness. He told himself it was a trick of grief, but the world kept adding impossible details. A line of small stones formed a spiral around a stump, and at its center lay a clump of hair blonde like Marcus's. When he reached to touch it, the hairs moved like they were breathing. Night fell as if cut from a single cloth, and every shadow lengthened a lie. His flashlight threw a thin, trembling column. Outside it, the forest was a black amphitheater where things could hide by the heartbeat. Jonah heard a voice that made his bones unhinge. Jonah. It was Marcus's nickname, the sound softened by wind and wet leaves, and it was coming from everywhere and nowhere. He answered, and the forest answered back with laughter that was almost a name, the syllables wrong, but pierced with recognition. He found footprints, two sets crossing, one older and ragged, one new and small, and followed them to a clearing where the moon cut a perfect silver disk on earth. There, in the hollow, sat a figure with Marcus's shoulders and a face rearranged by shadow. Up close, the face betrayed an unnatural calm. The eyes held too much patience. The skin was laced with pale veins like ink in paper. "You were looking for me," Marcus said, and the voice carried the soft cadence of guilt. Jonah stepped forward, and the figure did something Jonah's mind could not file as either human or animal. It smiled, slowly, and reached out, pressing a single finger to Jonah's lips, as if to quiet a child. Behind the figure, the soil had been turned into a ring of shallow graves, each marked with a trinket, a watch, a grocery card, a hair tie. Jonah recognized several faces from missing person posters, neighbors, a teacher, a bartender, a gallery of absence. The second twist folded like a blade. When Jonah shoved the finger away and lunged, the figure didn't flee. Instead, Marcus, if it was Marcus, began to speak in a low, even tone about keeping things safe. "They come back wrong," he said. "They ask to be held." He tapped a palm to the earth, and it thudded like a drum. From beneath the soil came a sound like fingernails over a coffin lid. Jonah felt the satchel's strap grow warm against his skin, and with an animal terror, realized the satchel itself had changed. The edges were crusted with dirt and small bones gleamed where leather met seam. Voices leaped from the seams, soft, pleading, names Jonah could not tell if they belonged to the living or to his own memory. Panic drove Jonah through a chase that blurred into a nightmare, branches snagging at his jacket, roots twisting like hands, every path folding into another until the world became a maze of smell and breath. He ran because the only honest thing left was the refusal to be claimed. Behind him, the forest multiplied footsteps. Voices rose in harmonies that mimicked familiarity, whispering apologies and invitations, promising rest. He barreled into a road, lungs screaming, and did not stop until town lights broke the endless dark. But the town's normalcy had thinned. A photograph from the satchel sat on a diner counter, the Marcus in it grinning with the same empty smile. And a napkin tucked under Jonah's car key read, "You looked, and that was enough." He fumbled the napkin until the paper shredded under his fingers, and a strand of blonde hair fell through, coiling like a living thing. Down the rearview mirror for a breath, Marcus's face filled the passenger window. Not in flesh, but in shadow, smiling with teeth that caught light like knives. Jonah accelerated, the engine a whining animal, but the strap of the satchel tightened as if something below his ribs shifted and settled. The forest waited at the edge of town like a patient god. Inside his chest, something had found a place to rest. The last thing Jonah heard as he drove into the night was a whisper under the seat, warm and familiar. The first thing Jonah noticed was the silence, complete, not the soft hum of insects he expected, but a vacuum that swallowed sound like a mouth. He had driven until the asphalt narrowed into dirt, and then walked until his boots sank into loam, damp with last night's rain. The map on his phone had led him here, a thin, unnamed stretch of forest on the edge of town, where his brother, Marcus, disappeared 2 months ago. Jonah's hand smelled of coffee and motor oil. He clutched a leather satchel that had belonged to Marcus, as if the strap could tether him to memory. The trees leaned as if listening, trunks sheened with green-black moss. Light came through in pale knives. Jonah called Marcus's name once, his voice small, and the forest answered with nothing but the creak of branches like slow joints. He checked the satchel, a folded photograph of the two of them at a lake, Marcus laughing with a cigarette between his fingers, a pocket knife, a receipt from a dyer stamped the night Marcus vanished. Jonah slid the photo back, feeling the weight of absence press against his chest. At first the strangeness was subtle. The paths did not go where maps said they should. A marked trail looped him back to the same hollow stump with a raw ring of exposed root. He found scratches in bark, too straight, too deliberate to be deer. Once, on a fallen log, he saw a smear of something dark and glossy, sticky under his thumb, not quite mud. The air carried other smells now, copper and wet cloth, like a nose pressed to old wounds. Jonah's pulse thudded, and his hands remembered the gentleness of Marcus's laugh. "You okay?" he whispered into the trees, and for a heartbeat, heard what might have been an answer. A distant, stunned chuckle that sounded like Marcus but was wrong, as if someone had learned to mimic memory. Walking deeper, Jonah found signs of habitation, a coil of rope, a child's shoe, a circle of stones with hair woven through them. He sat, breath hollow, and a wind moved through the branches, carrying a voice, soft, addressed like a plea. Jonah, he froze. The name came from nowhere and everywhere. He followed it, rationality tethered to grief, until he reached a clearing where the shadow of a figure hunched over the earth. Relief burst like light. Marcus, until the figure turned. The face was wrong, skin mottled, eyes too wide and white at the rims, a mouth that smiled with too many teeth. Marcus's jaw, still recognizable, opened and said in a voice that was Marcus and not, "You found me." Jonah stepped back. Marcus, the name clung to him. The man or thing tilted his head like a curious animal. "You were never looking," it said, and the sound of the voice unstitched Jonah. He lunged forward, seizing the satchel. The thing's hand brushed his, and a scent of iron and night-blooming flowers filled Jonah's nose. He tasted guilt. Guilt. Twist one came so quietly it felt like waking. The photograph in the satchel had changed. Marcus, in the picture, now stared directly at Jonah, lips peeling back, eyes hollowed. Jonah's stomach dropped as he realized the smiling Marcus at the lake was gone. The satchel's contents rearranged themselves in small, impossible ways. The knife now had a smear Jonas hadn't seen before. The ground shifted, not under Jonah's feet but in the forest's mind. Paths narrowed, sounds bowed inward. He ran. He found tracks, 2 sets, one fresh, one older, leading toward a thicket that hummed like a throat. A childish voice sang under the leaves. Jonah called out, voice ragged. The voice answered with Marcus's favorite song, sung off-key. He pushed through, branches snatching at his jacket, and stumbled into the second twist, a ring of shallow graves, each marked with a shoe, and in the center, Marcus sitting cross-legged before a hole, humming. Around the hole lay small scraps of photographs, faces of people Jonah recognized from missing person posters in town. A dog walker, neighbors. Jonah's knees buckled. "What did you do?" he asked, though the question was only ever his. Marcus lifted his head, and in his face, the last thing Jonah wanted to see. Not malice, but a patient, exhausted devotion. "It wouldn't stop," Marcus said. "They asked to be kept." He tapped the earth. From the hole rose a slight movement, like a breath under cloth. Jonah knelt, heart a-drum, the satchel heavy with an understanding he had not invited. The forest listened. Marcus reached out and placed Jonah's hand on the soft soil. "You could stay," Marcus whispered. "You always wanted to belong somewhere." The world narrowed to the smell of soil and the weight of Marcus's palm. Jonah thought of leaving, of police reports, of calling their mother. Instead, he felt the pull of the hole and the softness at the edge of sleep. The forest leaned closer, and the hair on Jonah's arm rose as though a hand brushed it. He tried to stand, tried to run. Marcus smiled a smile that made Jonah remember every late-night fight and every apology unspoken. "Sorry," Marcus said, but it sounded like mercy. The hole exhaled. Jonah felt something, tiny, a root, a cold thing, curl around his wrist. He wrenched free, blood hot and bitter in his mouth, and scrambled away. The faces in the photographs seemed to follow him with their blank, folded eyes. The climax came in a storm of sound, branches cracking like snapped ribs, the forest chanting in the rustle of leaves. Jonah ran blind, the satchel thumping against his side, his lungs burning. Behind him, footsteps multiplied. A chorus of voices, happy, pleading, accusing, rose to a pitch that nearly shattered him. He burst through the tree line into his car, breath heaving, and slammed the door. The vehicle rocked with a pressure that felt like a hand on the roof. He sped away, road swallowing noise into normalcy. But when he reached the diner from the receipt, he found the photograph from the satchel propped on the counter, the Marcus in it smiling with empty eyes. A note slid under the cup holder in his car. "You weren't looking hard enough." He looked back into the rearview mirror, and for a second, the passenger seat held a shadow where no one sat. And Jonah realized the last, smallest shift. The satchel strap around his shoulder felt a little tighter, like something underneath had curled to sleep. Outside, the trees waited. Inside him, something had started to root. The first thing Mara noticed was the silence, so thick it felt like another person breathing against her neck. It swallowed the crunch of her boots, the sway of her pack, even the distant hum of the highway she'd driven away from. The only honest sound was her own pulse. She had come to the paragraph to finish a book, to bury herself in the kind of isolation that made sentences honest. The forest answered with a hush that smelled of wet earth and pine resin, like a throat closed against the world. Mara was small, with a startling way of holding her shoulders, the sort of body language practiced by people who had learned to carry their own fears. She moved with deliberate care, noting the autumn light skewed green through high branches, the way shadows pooled in hollows like ink. At first, the oddities were gentle. An old woman's shawl draped across a stump, a child's shoe half buried in leaves, footprints that stopped at the rim of a clearing and did not continue. She told herself stories to explain them. Hunters, lost campers, the storm last week. The forest let her believe. By the third night, the small lies thinned. Mara woke not to frogs or the far-off barking of a fox, but to something like someone whispering behind the canvas of her tent. Words too soft to parse, syllables brushed like moth wings. She unzipped and peered out. The moon had been cut. Silver laced the trunks and nothing moved. Yet a line of nails glinted in the mud inches from the tent flap, tiny and deliberate, as if someone had tested the zipper's seam and found it wanting. She began to find messages carved into the undersides of branches, single words that tasted like other people's secrets. Stay, listen, sorry. They were not there the day before. When she touched one, the bark oozed resin like a wound, sticky and warm. A perfume of iron and old rain filled her nostrils. She tried to leave. The path she'd walked the first day braided impossible loops and returned her to the same mossy stone, as if the woods had rearranged themselves overnight to keep her inside a circle she had not seen form. Her phone lost signal on the track up. It had come back briefly the second night with a single, unnerving text from her own number. "Are you sure you're alone?" She thought of answering, but felt like a fraud speaking aloud to an empty battery. She started to follow the sounds, the soft scraping of branches, the breath of something pacing the tree line, hoping to find an explanation. The forest answered by handing her a person, an old man wearing a coat too thin for the cold, his eyes cataract-clouded and honest. "You shouldn't be here," he said. His voice a radio crackled through decades. "They remember what you forget." Mara asked what he meant. He tapped his temple and laughed like someone who'd misplaced a name. "Memory keeps people honest. You who come to forget?" He pointed at the words carved into the branch over her shoulder. The letters pulsed faintly, as if inked by a heart. "We keep memories too." She followed him to a clearing ringed with stones and found at the center a shallow pit filled with objects. Photographs curling at the edges, a child's tooth, a solitary wedding ring. Each item hummed as if it contained a whole life. The old man said nothing, but when she knelt and lifted a photograph, she tasted salt on her tongue and saw a room she had never been in, her mother laughing at a kitchen table. Mara could no longer remember. She looked up to ask how this was possible, and the man smiled with the horror of someone who had long accommodated impossible truths. "The paragraph keeps what you lose," he said. "It is hungry for names." Twist one struck like a snapped branch. Mara realized the photograph in her hand was not of her past, it was of her future. The woman smiling across the table was older, and at the edge of the frame a younger Mara, hair dark, and eyes full of things she had not yet done, clutched a manuscript inked with her own handwriting. The pit offered glimpses and not answers, and time in that glade felt like a looped film with frames missing. She ran then, not away but in, through a thicket that should have been a barrier but opened like a throat. The trees leaned inward and whispered names, the voices she had tried to forget, names of people she had let slip away under the weight of moving on. She understood, sickly, that the forest wanted the story she had come to write. It was not content with words on paper. It wanted to own the lines, to make her craft a record it could keep. The old man tapped the pit and said, "They don't forget the ones who forget." She refused. She burned the photographs one by one, watching faces fissure into black and smoke like confession. The forest did not flinch. Instead, it answered with a gust that smelt of char and old resolve. From the smoke, a figure stepped forward, Mara's brother, or someone who wore his face and grief. Twist 2. He was alive in town, thinking of his life in a suburban kitchen, unaware a shadow wearing his features had been summoned where memory had been set loose. He mouthed her name without sound. No one else could see him. His hands reached for her like a mirror. Mara felt suddenly like a character being edited out of her own life. She realized the final cruelty. By trying to take back what she had lost, she had given the paragraph permission. Memories burned made room for more. In the clearing, the ground began to pucker, skin like moss curling away to reveal, beneath, a hollow full of small, dark heads turned toward her. Figurines made of bark and bone, each molded from lives the forest had collected. They stared with the inquiry of hungry things. Mara ran, the whispering chorus rising to a scream that matched the rhythm of her feet. Behind her, branches clicked shut like jaws. She reached the road just before dawn, mud clinging to her calves, hands blistered from holding charred photos. She looked back once. The trees stood in polite rows, as if nothing had happened. Their trunks bled sap that gleamed like wet coins. When she tried to tell the car full of neighbors who found her, pale, respirations ragged, no one believed the words left her mouth. The old man's voice carried on the breeze, faint as a radio tuning out. "We keep what people forget." That night, at home, she opened her manuscript and found the last page blank, except for a single carved word. pressed into the paper as if by thumb ridge. "Stay." The whisper came from the closet. "Would you like a version focused more on atmospheric dread or on psychological unraveling?"